Bernhardt Seagle Hardware Company, Part 2. This is a continuation of photos and information from George and Johanna Bernhardt. Thank you so much for your contribution.
On April 19 of this year, an institution in Lenoir, North Carolina closed its doors for the first time in 179 years of continuous family operation. The Bernhardt Seagle Corporation. It's a figure of our history that you need to know a good deal more about, and we're going to learn. I'm talking to George Bernhardt, the man who closed that door on April 19. We'll talk with him in just a few seconds. George, the reason that I'm so stimulated to talk with you is when I was a kid, 13 and 14 years old, I used to be sent up in the Valley, Virginia every summer where my grandfather lived, and he ran a country store. So learning about you and your history has been absolutely exciting to me, but you go back to the first term of Andrew Jackson as President of the United States when this company was first founded, right?
That's correct, yeah. When we opened up, it was, we were just a wide spot in the road in the woods in Burke County, and years and years before our county or our town was founded.
I read there where it said that they got out there to the crossroads of the path and decided that they'd put the store there. Your ancestor came from New York or somewhere for a visit.
Yeah.
That's the way you got started.
Pretty much, yeah.
You had everything in that store, from ready-made clothing to nails and hammers and nuts and bolts. So it says.
Yeah, when you look back, I've got the old 1852 inventory, and you look through that, and we've got everything from pigs of lead to calico to McGuffey's reader. Just you name it, we've had it, and it was a right remarkable operation.
Well, I was so struck by the fact that you had the book on mathematics and you had McGuffey's readers alongside the calico and the ready-made shoes. And it was really, that's the way those stores were, though. They were the center of town, center of conversation. And as Mr. Mass said up there in the mountains in his store, if you didn't have it, you didn't need it. That's about the way you had to work, wasn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. Well, the distribution system was so difficult. And when I read some of the old records, they would send orders to New York City. Stuff would be shipped by sea to Charleston, and then our founder and some of the other stores in the area would send wagons down to Charleston and haul it back. So the whole process was 5 and 6 months from order to delivery. Very complicated.
But you couldn't have styles changes too fast in those days.
No, not hardly.
Well, it's so interesting, though, reading about your company and all your ancestors and a lot of history here. What role did they play in the founding of Caldwell County?
Okay, well, our founder, James Harper, he decided to build a store on the wagon road between Wilkesboro and Morganton, in what he thought was a likely spot. And at that point, it was in Burke County, and 10 years after he opened the store, the legislature created a new county, Caldwell, and at the time they created the county, there was no town to be the county seat. So Mr. Harper was one of the original commissioners, and he gave a piece of property off of his land to be divided into lots and sold off to make enough money to build a courthouse, and that's the beginnings of Lenoir. One thing he did, once he'd given the property, he then bid back in the 100 block of Main Street, and in 1845 built a multi-story brick building there and put his store there. And so we've been on the 100 block of Main Street from 1845 till last month.
Well, he had a lot to do with the Blowing Rock Turnpike. I'd never heard of that before.
That's right.
Was that a road that they cut out of the mountains to connect the two areas?
Well, as I understand it, he felt that there was a market, an untapped market in the farmers up in the mountains. There was no good way to get there. So he was the principal in a corporation called the Blowing Rock Turnpike, which built a road from Lenoir to Blowing Rock and operated it for about 30 years on tolls, at which time the state finally got it. But it was, he opened up that whole area for commerce and travel.
So all the talk today about toll roads in North Carolina is nothing new. This was going on more than 100 years ago.
Nothing new. I think the difference is the idea that an individual would own the road.
That'd be a very striking thing to do. I was also struck by one of the lines in your paper you wrote about one of the ancestors being brought into town. He was going to be the county surveyor, but he had to teach Greek, Latin, and mathematics in the schools on the side.
That's right.
That's a pretty big assignment.
Well, that was my great-granddaddy Matthias, great-great-granddaddy, excuse me. And he came in when the county was formed and did a lot of the initial surveying, set up the register of deeds, I guess. And he was unusual for the 1840s, and he was a man who had considerable education. And so when you had somebody who could do that, you tend to ride him pretty hard. So he did a lot of stuff. You know.
In reading about the impact of the Civil War on your operations, it got to the point where you would do business with your clients and people there in the community by barter. There just wasn't any money for anybody. Is that what you found in the records?
Well, in the records, particularly after the Civil War, we did an awful lot with things like dried blackberries and sassafras root. People would bring them in, and we would accumulate them in large drums. When we got them full, we would ship them somewhere. I found a record where we were shipping a lot of sassafras root to Burroughs Wellcome. Apparently they were making some marvelous patent medicine with it. But we did that. Because there was no money, you had to find lots of ways to do things during the Civil War, and then for 20 or 30 years after. We started a tannery north of town, and when a man would slaughter a cow, he'd skin it and bring the raw, bloody hide in and put it on his account, and we'd turn it into leather and make it into horse collars and tack and sell it back to him.
All but a self-contained operation?
It's all self-contained. And we also did a lot of trading for labor. If a man had a wagon, he'd come and trade us a day's hauling for merchandise. And I found a lot of records of that type up through the 1880s. So, you know.
It sounds like they kept a record of just about everything they did.
Well, the Harpers and my great-granddaddy were both notorious record keepers. They wrote everything down. For that matter, I think of my grandfather. He was put in charge of a little piece of woods behind the house about 1920 something, and had $100 in the account for it. And and when he died in '72, there was detailed record of every tree cut, every dollar spent, everything. The family was known for writing it down.
Now, talk to me a bit about Major Harper and the railroad and the. You spoke about tannery, but and the forerunning of the furniture industry in that part of our state. He was really in the beginnings of that, was he not?
Major Harper was a major developer of the area. He and his dad both they were so interested in seeing things happen in the community, and they say the major was one of the great organizers of bringing the railroad up to Lenoir. And when the railroad got in trouble, he actually took it over and ran it for several years as president of it. He started the first bank. He did start one of the first furniture factories, the Harper plant, which then became many years later, became a division of Brohill. He was just he was somebody who saw the potential in the area in terms of natural resources and people, and he brought people in. You know, basically the Harpers really recruited the Bernhardt family to the area, and several other prominent families came in originally to do something for the Harpers, and they didn't mind sharing the wealth as long as everybody came up. You know.
So here, your ancestors then owned the first highway, built the railroad, helped found the furniture industry, built the bank, and built the first mercantile operation in the county. Very entrepreneurial people.
Yeah, they wanted to see good things happen.
Well, this store with a big influence that way.
Yeah.
Well, in the 1920s now, you sort of changed direction. It became more of a hardware operation. Is that what you changed to?
Well, we really began changing directions in the 1890s.
Yes.
As the town grew, And as my great-grandfather was running things, he moved more and more into hardware and furniture and permanent goods, and as business specialized more, that he didn't need to be continuing to sell produce and gingham cloth and such as that. So he went in the direction of hard goods, and that continued. Now, during the 1890s and early part of the 20th century, he did a lot of unusual things, like there was a lot of logging going on, and he actually stocked and sold narrow gauge locomotives and rail which was how they pulled the logs out, which is kind of unusual.
It certainly was.
Some of the old ads, we've got the steam powered cast iron wheel tractors and such as that. But over the years, we've always attempted to find what needed to be done and then do it, whatever that happened to be. And so the business has changed as the market.
And, how devastating was the Depression on all of this in that area of North Carolina?
Well, of course, it was terrible. I personally have no experience of it, but my dad and my grandparents talked about it a lot. I know at the store they reached a point in the depth of Depression, things were so bad, they had plenty of merchandise but no money, which was pretty typical, I think. And there's a story told that at the worst of it, they were trying to save on electric bills and heat. And on the mezzanine, in our little office space, there was a fireplace. And whoever got there first would build a fire in the fireplace and sit down. And all the other clerks, as they got there, would come and sit around the fire with the lights off in the building. And when a customer arrived at the front back door and the bell rang, whoever's turn it was would get up and put his coat on, walk down, meet the customer, walk them to the section store that they needed to go to, turn that light on, sell them that merchandise, make change out of a nail apron he was carrying with him, turn the light off, walk the customer back to the door and go back upstairs and sit down by the fire. Now those are fairly hard times.
I was a teenager then, and your description very accurate. Was that a time then that again you sold goods in form of bartering, really?
Not so much. There was an awful lot of credit, local credit extended at that point, though it wasn't any kind of huge amounts, but a lot of people ran small accounts, and that seemed to be the primary vehicle then, rather than barter.
Well, then was also when you moved to plow points and plows and more mechanical devices, and literally changed the direction of the enterprise.
Well, during the Depression, as things began to pick up, I know we developed an industrial sales area and sold power transmission equipment and industrial compressors and abrasives and such as that, as things began to open back up. And that became a pretty big component of the business for many years.
And looking through the pictures that you brought with you for this program, I centered on one in 1942 because there's one lady in there, and it reminds me so much of my grandmother that I couldn't keep from looking at her. But that was the way the store functioned right at the beginning of World War II, huh?
Pretty much. I mean, of course, that particular picture you can see. One of the things that always amazed me is everybody in coats and ties and all dressed up. It was a much more formal operation back then. My great-grandmother was officially in charge of it, though in practice my granddaddy ran it. That was I think we brought an article with us talking about that. We had a lot of credit business, and we also had a lot of cash business and a lot of contractor business. And
so you were really running three separate divisions.
Three separate kinds of things, and that went on for most of the years of the 20th century.
What did World War II do to the whole enterprise, George? How did it take your people out? So many men went into service then. What impact did it have?
Well, I know that the employees suddenly got a lot older as far as who we had on the floor. And from what I understand, the whole rationing effort was an incredible, voluminous, difficult thing, and my grandfather did not enjoy that very much, and I think it was an awful lot of effort to have anything to sell, and a lot of things couldn't be had because of material scarcities. There's plenty of money, but no stuff. Just like 10 years before, there's plenty of stuff and no money.
Well, when Bernhardt Seagle was at its prime, how large an enterprise was it in terms of numbers of workers or dollar volume, or what would you say?
Well, at the peak, when we had a building supply and industrial, we had about 40, 45 employees.
That many?
And did a couple $1 million. Yeah, that was about the peak.
Was this from 8 to 6 every day, 6 days a week?
6 days a week, yeah.
Did you bring in young boys to teach them how to succeed their fathers who'd worked for you?
Actually, I've done that. We have had quite a few folks who are second and third generation employees over the years, which has been kind of a nice thing. I know that in my high school days, I worked as a stock boy, and every other stock boy working with me was the child of somebody in the store, and several of them came on to work with us after they finished school.
Did you have a warehouse somewhere that stocked the bulk so that you could feed it into the store? Or was it all in one place?
No, it was all in one place. The store was it was a 3-story and full basement building, built in 1903 at a time when most shipments came in by rail and tended to be full boxcars. So we actually had as many square feet of warehouse in the building as we had sales floor, because that's the way it worked. You know, you couldn't buy 3 wood stoves, you had to buy 60, you know, and so you had to have somewhere to put them. So the business has always had a lot of warehouse, and as distribution changed, we needed it less and less, but yeah, we always had plenty of room for stuff. You know.
In that day, was your primary advertising in the weekly newspaper or some regional paper?
Newspaper was most of it. Yeah, we were as the last ad we ran, we were the oldest advertiser in the local paper. The only people that advertised in their first edition that were still in existence, other than them.
In reading what you wrote, you came up with a phrase, human scale merchant. Did that mean that in your mind, your role playing in the community was to anticipate your customers, know their children, know the community, get involved in the community? Is that what you meant?
I think that's essentially it. You know, it is something about doing business with your friends and neighbors, which is what my dad always said. That's who you do business with, is your friends and neighbors, not your customers, your friends and neighbors, and I think. Yeah, the fact that the customer comes in and you know them and they know you and you have a relationship with each other. You know, we're in a time now in retail where I think with the whole approach to retailing, the assumption is that the merchant is to be watched, not to be trusted necessarily, and we always thought that, you know, you wanted people to come in and if you said this is what you need, they'd believe you because you had a history of telling them the truth and dealing with them that way, and you were part of the community. You know.
When did you begin to feel the impact of the so-called big box enterprises?
Well, it's probably been about 10 or 11 years since they began to get into our area in such a way as to make a change, and. You know, prior to that, we'd had things like, you know, there'd been a mall built and such as that, but they hadn't really significantly impacted our business. It's the advent of the big boxes that really has changed traffic patterns and purchasing habits.
We're speaking here of these major national chains that do carload lots and things like this. But the loss you feel there is not only personal in the sense of your own business, but that business of the human scale, that gets lost in these big box operations.
Well, it does. And one thing that concerns me, not just for us, but for all over the country, is that in the smaller towns, most of your leadership has always come from people who are local businessmen, people who are truly invested in the community, and they're not going anywhere else. This is where they have to be, and as that kind of person is run out, the big box managers are great people, a lot of them, but they're not the people who are going to run for city council or sit on the school board. And I think it makes a difference in the community when you have people who are really invested in the community, who are wanting to be involved in the leadership of the community.
When the time came, April 19th came, was this a decision that you reviewed with all of your kinfolk, since this has been a family operation for all these years and years and years? Pretty painful?
It was very painful, and I did talk it over with quite a few of them. I can't say all of them. I've got way too many kinfolk for that. In my immediate family, we've been discussing it for about a year, really. My father, who died just shortly before we started this thing, Dad and I had talked about the numbers and discussed it quite a bit, and he was aware of the way the numbers were trending and the way things looked, and he and we both felt it was a very painful thing, but we'd had some extended discussions, and he was aware of where things were liable to be heading. Yeah.
Well, you were sitting at what was the heartbeat of the commercial enterprise of that community for many, many years. Now you've experienced this kind of change. As you look around you in your own community, though, at the schools and the role of the churches and the invent and invasion, if I may use a different word, of other types of enterprises, do you feel that that sense of community you were just characterizing is changing in Lenoir and Morganton and all the rest of our smaller towns?
I think that there is a very real danger that all of our smaller towns are going to lose their identities. We seem to be working toward this kind of homogenized country of big box stores and fast food restaurants and national restaurant chains, and national financial institutions, for that matter. They provide wonderful services, but you can walk into one anywhere in the country and it's the same thing. I do think that the identity of community over the years has been largely defined by the businesses that operate there, by the local people, whether you're talking about the manufacturers, the local banks, the local merchants, whatever. They have a profound effect on what kind of community you have. And I do think that as the local involved entrepreneurs more and more get marginalized, and as more and more of the economic life of the community runs through national operations, it will change things. And one other thing that I think does make a difference is when local businesses are profitable, the wealth is built in the community. When national businesses are profitable, the wealth is built somewhere else. That's right. You don't have the local people who can step up for the big capital drive or the big fundraising and say, hey, yeah, I'll put it up, or I'll match it. And that's something to think about as well, I think.
On April 19th, did all of your friends in the community come, and you had a clearance sale? I'm sure you were just getting rid of everything, but that was a time of real reminiscence, was it not?
Well, that whole last couple of weeks was full of that. I had an awful lot of people come by and talk about their experiences with us, and express their general condolences at the death of something that had been around all of their lives. It was a kind of a bittersweet and bittersweet time.
What was the feeling in your heart then on April 20? You didn't get up and go to the store as usual.
Well, actually I did, because I had a bunch of other stuff I had to get done. But it was a very peculiar feeling to not open the door at 8 o'clock in the morning and turn the lights on. I've been doing that 6 days a week since 1972, and it was kind of a strange feeling not to do it. And I haven't really got over that yet. I don't think that's going to change in a hurry. You know.
Well, thank you for coming and telling us this wonderful story of the entrepreneurial spirit of your family, which built a great tradition that lived longer than anybody else in that world of retail merchandising in our state. And thank you for your willingness to share it. And friends, I know you've enjoyed hearing about this story of the passing of a great American institution, the store down the street at home. Mr. Bernhardt and I thank you for letting us visit with you. Until next week then, good night.
Thanks to George and Johanna Bernhardt for this PDF. I'll read this PDF for you in case your vision is poor or your screen is too small. Bernhardt Seagle Company, A Brief History, 1829 through 2004. Introductory remarks. Over the last few months, an article in the News Topic and an often repeated program on public access TV have drawn attention to the age and history of Bernhardt Seagle Company. I appreciate your invitation to tell about my family's business. If this isn't a particularly polished presentation, bear with me. I am far more accustomed to communicating one-on-one with someone about a plumbing problem than I am to making an organized talk. For those of you who read the article in the paper, we are not the oldest hardware store in the country. According to the National Retail Hardware Association, we are the second oldest hardware store in the country, behind an operation in Worcester, Massachusetts. However, the folks in Massachusetts have gone through a lot of ownership changes and currently belong to two Frenchmen who have no relation to the earlier ownership. Our continuity of ownership is unique. Another fact, as far as can be told, we are the oldest continuously operating retail business in the South. Over the next few minutes, I will give you a quick history of the store and, in the process, try to give you a feel for how we operated in different eras. 1829. In 1829, the nation was 53 years old. Andrew Jackson was in his first term as president. Caldwell County did not exist, and western North Carolina was largely undeveloped. James Harper, a young man from Adams County, Pennsylvania, rode into Wilkesboro looking for opportunity. He stayed with Samuel Finley, a merchant. This stop was a turning point for James Harper. He met Miss Caroline Ellen Finley, who later became his wife. More important, from Bernhardt Seagle's standpoint, Finley told him there were no stores between Wilkesboro and Morganton and encouraged him to look at that area. James Harper formed a partnership with John Wall, a kinsman of the Finleys, to develop a store. The partners chose a location on the Wilkesboro-Morganton Stage Road near Fort Grider and built a log store. The store stood where the home Fairfield now stands on Harper Avenue. Typical of frontier stores, Harper and Wall carried everything from blackstrap molasses to ready-made clothing. Looking at our 1852 physical inventory, some of the things you see are bulk sugar and flour, bolts of calico and gingham, coffee, buttons and ribbon, saddle trees, buggy and wagon whips, kegs of nails, umbrellas, castor oil, glass, putty by the keg, stove blacking, McGuffey's readers, Davy's arithmetic, and cast iron muffin pans. Large amounts of goods were exchanged for roots, herbs, barks, and dried fruits. Folks would bring in balm of Gilead bulbs, pennyroyal, catnip, sassafras, dried berries, slippery elm, and sweet birch to trade for goods. These things would be accumulated, packaged, and sold to different manufacturers of drugs. Most goods bought for sale were contracted for in New York, shipped to Charleston, and then brought in by wagon. An entry in James Harper's diary in 1850 said, "Zadok Smith returned with goods, being gone for 26 days, an unusually long trip." The store succeeded from the start, quickly developing a good trade. John Wall, after a year in the wilderness, decided to return to his family home in Virginia, and the store became known as Harper's Store. Caldwell County was created from parts of Burke and Wilkes counties in 1841, and James Harper played a part in creating Lenoir. He gave 30 acres to be used for a town. When the property was divided and auctioned to raise money for a courthouse, he bid in the 100 block of Main Street, and in 1845 built a store, which would later become the Bank of Lenoir building. In 1847, he organized, invested in, and served as president of the Blowing Rock Turnpike Corporation, which built and operated the road to Blowing Rock for over 30 years. Around this time, his son G.W.F. Harper joined the firm. Also around this time, my great-great-grandfather Matthias A. Bernhardt moved to Caldwell County from Salisbury to serve as a county surveyor and teach Greek, Latin, and mathematics at the Finley School, where Bellevue Cemetery is today. He and his wife Barbara bought land on the Lower Creek and built a home which still stands on the Taylorsville Road behind Cedar Hills Apartments. Matthias and James became friends and associates. With the coming of the Civil War, G.W.F. Harper entered the Army, rising to the rank of major commanding the 58th North Carolina Regiment. With the end of the war, he returned and joined his father in what was then known as Harper and Son. The years after the war were very hard. Money was scarce, and much of the store's trade was in barter. I have found several produce books which record transactions paid for in apples, eggs, ginseng, berries, corn, and beeswax, as well as all the root, herb, and bark items traded for before the war. Along with the produce books or shipping books detailing shipments of produce to customers, stores, and manufacturers in North and South Carolina. Some of the other ledgers record transactions paid for by labor with days and half-days of mowing, threshing, cooking, and driving credited at between 50 cents to $1 a day. In December of 1876, my great-great-grandmother Barbara died. She was followed in February by great-great-grandfather Matthias. They left 2 teenage sons at a farm behind. The Harpers took these young men under their wing and saw them through to adulthood. Both boys, as they reached the age to do so, helped in the store. In 1879, James Harper died and was succeeded by his son G.W.F. Harper. The store became G.W.F. Harper Company. Major Harper was a man of ideas. He pushed for the railroad when the C&N.W. came, served for a time as its president. He saw the need for a local bank and started the Bank of Lenoir in 1882. He was also involved in the early development of textile and furniture production. Because he was spread thin, he looked for help and saw it in George and Johanna Bernhardt. In 1884, the boys sold the family farm to the Strick family and invested in the store now called Harper and Bernhardt. During these years, Harper and Bernhardt established a tannery. The store would trade for uncured hides, tan them, and produce harness and horse collars for sale. John Bernhardt married Ellie Harper and embarked on a risky venture manufacturing furniture. He seems to have made a go of it. 1893. George bought majority control of the business from the Harpers and changed the name to Bernhardt and Company. The following year, signaling a change in direction from the old general store, he renamed the firm Bernhardt Hardware and Furniture Company and began to emphasize durable goods, hardware, tools, and furniture sold for cash. Ads from this time feature cast iron ranges and stoves, wooden furniture, bicycles, sewing machines, agricultural machinery, axes, saws, horseshoes, plows, planters, harrows, and mowing machines. The store sold caskets, a practice that continued until 1929, and had a horse-drawn hearse for pickup and delivery. In aid of the booming timber industry, the store sold narrow-gauge steam engines and track. Now, all this retail activity was going on in the 1845 store building, which Bernhardt Hardware and Furniture now shared with the Bank of Lenoir, the Masonic Hall, the original telephone exchange, the single room which housed the newly organized Citizen Savings and Loan, the post office, and G.W.F. Harper's various other enterprises. Things got tight in 1903. Something was done about it. Great-granddad built the current building just down the street from the old one and moved the retail operation into it. I have a picture of the building just before the grand opening. At over 20,000 square feet of space, the new building was a giant for its time. I encourage you to come by and look at the picture and note that Main Street is not paved. Great-grandfather, feeling some limitations of mortality, brought in his dear friend, fellow Mason, and future brother-in-law, J.C. Seagle, as a partner in 1905. Mr. Seagle was a widower with a young daughter. He and his daughter became part of the family when Mr. Seagle married Isabel Richmond, my great-grandmother's sister. The firm name changed to Bernhardt Seagle Company. In 1912, George Bernhardt died, leaving 7 minor children. Great-grandmother became majority owner, but Mr. Seagle ran the business. In 1918, Matt Bernhardt came into the business, and in 1920, my grandfather, Richmond, joined the firm. When the two men were well established, Mr. Seagle retired. During the 20s, the store went through a major rework. The original facade, made of sun-dried brick, had suffered from the elements and was replaced. The store was organized into departments, and time payment and revolving charge accounts were established. In 1929, our 100th anniversary was celebrated with a month-long promotion, and things looked promising. Then came the crash. The Depression was a terrible time as customers and suppliers went under all around us. Granddad said that at one point it got so bad one winter we operated like this. There was a fireplace in the office on the mezzanine. The first employee would light it. When others came, all would sit around it. When a customer came in, a salesperson would put on his coat, go down to the customer, see what he wanted, take him or her to that part of the store, turn on that light, wait on him, make change, turn off the light, and return to the fireplace. Pictures of that store at that time not only show our traditional hardware items, but jewelry, globes, baby buggies, tires, and phonograph records. In those depressed times, we tried anything we thought might sell. In 1933, G. Lewis Bernhardt, Bub Bernhardt, joined the firm, and in spite of the bad times, we opened a building supply. The old buildings still stand across the street from the LHS Band building. We also added a sales organization for the industrial supplies. With the beginning of the Second World War, Matt Bernhardt felt the need to serve, and too old for the military, went to work in the diplomatic corps. Bub, with his building experience, became a CB. Richmond was left to carry on the business through the years of shortage and rationing. After the war, the combination of pent-up demand and forced savings fueled incredible growth. During the late 40s, 50s, and 60s, our motto was, everything for the home. And we could do this, providing all the materials, appliances, plumbing, furnishings, even the pictures on the walls, lamps on the tables, and rugs on the floors. After operating as a partnership for 118 years, we incorporated, keeping the name Bernhardt, Seagle and Company. Dad, after his service in the Marines and a degree from Davidson, came to work in 1949. In 1966, with Bub wanting to retire and the labor-intensive buildings we were operating in making it less profitable, we closed out the building supply business, selling its assets to our long-term employee, Larkin Bentley. He renamed the operation Lenoir Building Supply, moved to better quarters, and passed that successful firm on to his children. Also in 1966, Dad took over as president, and he and my grandfather undertook to buy the shares of my great-uncles and great-aunts, an expensive 10-year project. In 1971, we opened a second location in Hudson, an experiment which, after a decade, we gave up. In 1972, I finished college and came to work full-time. In 1974, we decided we did not wish to be in the business of selling borax furniture on credit to poor folks, and concentrated on our attention on the hardware and industrial supply businesses with notable success. Dad stepped down in 1982 and I became president. The mall did not affect us. We weathered economic downturns and grew in the 1990s. The last decade has been tough. Like every other small independent merchant, we are fighting to hold on to market share and profitability in a day of big box stores, multi-billion-dollar discounting behemoths, internet and catalog sales, and sales flight to regional centers. However, as we prepare to celebrate our 175th birthday, I believe there is a place for a human-scale merchant who establishes personal relationships with his customers, deals in quality, remarkable selections, and expert caring help. Thank you for your attention. George Bernhardt. George Lynn Bernhardt Sr., age 83, of Bernhardt Court, Southwest Lenoir, died Monday, February the 25th, 2008. He was born October 25th, 1924, to the late Richmond Gilbert and Ruth White Bernhardt. In addition to his parents, he was also preceded by one son, Thomas Maury Bernhardt. Mr. Bernhardt attended Lenoir Public Schools and graduated from Lenoir High School, where he played the first chair cornet in the Lenoir High School band. After graduation in 1942, he entered Davidson College. His education there was interrupted by World War II, in which he served for 3 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, surviving the Battle of Iwo Jima and then being a part of the force that occupied Japan. His reconnaissance platoon was the first to set foot on the Japanese island of Kyushu. He has often described the eerie sensation of marching through the streets being watched by silent, worried Japanese civilians. After his discharge from the Marine Corps, he returned to Davidson and then, following his graduation in 1949, to Lenoir to work with his father in the family hardware store, Bernhardt Seagle Company. George led a full life in service to his church and community. A longtime member of the First Presbyterian Church of Lenoir, he was an elder and a deacon. active in fundraising campaigns and in the men of church and serving on the Presbyterian committees. For many years he sang in the church choir, sometimes as a soloist, beginning as a tenor and later changing to baritone. He served for a time as chairman of the Caldwell County Library Board and president of the Chamber of Commerce, and was a charter member of the Caldwell County Men's Chorus. Following his retirement from business, he was active in the adult literacy programs and communities in schools. A member of the Lenoir City Council for 38 years, and at times as mayor pro tem, his area of concentration was public utilities. He worked tirelessly for the water and sewer system of Caldwell County. The recently completed water treatment plant at Roadhiss is named the George L. Bernhardt Sr. Municipal Water Treatment Plant. Survivors include his wife of 60 years, Catherine Jones Bernhardt, two sons, George Lynn Bernhardt Jr. and wife Johanna of Lenoir, and the Reverend Dr. James Franklin Bernhardt and his wife Anita of Hickory. One daughter, Dr. Jane Bernhardt Brumer, and husband Paul of Waynesville, a daughter-in-law, Margaret Adkins of Canton, Georgia, one brother, Richmond G. Bernhardt Jr., and wife Doris of Greensboro, 10 grandchildren, Dr. Emily Bernhardt, Staff Sergeant George L. Bernhardt III, Molly Nauder, J. Travis Bernhardt, Michael Brumer, Aaron Brumer, Patrick Brumer, Catherine Brumer, Samuel Bernhardt, and Mary Bernhardt, great-grandchildren Hannah and Gwyneth Bernhardt. A graveside service will be held Thursday, February the 28th, 2008 at 10:30 a.m. at Bellevue Cemetery, with a memorial service following at 11 o'clock a.m. to be held at the First Presbyterian Church of Lenoir. The family will receive friends Wednesday evening from 6:30 to 8 o'clock p.m. at the Greer McElveen Funeral Home. In lieu of flowers, memorials may be made to the Caldwell Hospice and Palliative Care, 902 Kirkwood Street, Lenoir, North Carolina, 28645. First Presbyterian Church, 1002 Kirkwood Street, Lenoir, North Carolina, 28645, or to the charity of one choice. Catherine Jones Bernhardt, 85, of Bernhardt Court, Lenoir, died Saturday, December the 3rd, 2011, at Silver Buff Rehabilitation Unit in Canton, North Carolina. She was born January the 28th, 1926, in Danville, Virginia, to the late Ira Franklin Jones and Mamie Snow Jones. In addition to her parents, she was preceded in death by her husband, George L. Bernhardt Sr., one son, Thomas Maury Bernhardt, one sister, Virginia J. Schonk, and one brother, Richard Jones. Survivors include two sons, George Lynn Bernhardt Jr. and wife Johanna of Durham, and the Reverend Dr. James Franklin Bernhardt and wife, the Reverend Anita Bernhardt of Hickory, one daughter, Dr. Jane Bernhardt Brumer, and husband Paul of Waynesville, daughter-in-law Margaret Adkins of Atlanta, one brother, Dr. Ira Jones of New York City, one sister, Frances Hass of Satellite Beach, Florida, 10 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. Mrs. Bernhardt was a graduate of Lenoir High School, where she played string bass in the Lenoir High School band. After 3 years studying to be a dietitian at the Women's College of the University of North Carolina, now UNCG, she married George Bernhardt in 1947 and lived for a time in Davidson, where George was attending Davidson College, completing the education interrupted by World War II. After his graduation, they returned to Lenoir, where Catherine was a devoted homemaker for her husband and her 4 children, as well as a devoted caregiver for her mother, mother-in-law, and her maiden aunt. She loved holiday gatherings when the house would be full of children and grandchildren who all enjoyed her excellent cooking. One year, her Christmas gift to each of her 4 children was a cookbook containing family recipes in her handwriting, recipes which will be cherished for years to come. Catherine and George enjoyed traveling, taking long trips in their camping trailer, visiting places of interest all over the United States. Later they had a little cottage in the mountains near Pinola, where they spent the summer months. There Catherine planted wildflowers and was an enthusiastic bird watcher. She made many new friends among the people who had come from Florida and other places to spend the summer and had time for her mystery novel passion. In Lenoir, Catherine was an active member of the Lenoir Service League for many years. An avid bridge player, she belonged to several bridge clubs as well as the Community Music Club. She was a member of the First Presbyterian Church, where she participated in the Women of the Church work, the Sojourners class, and sang in the choir. Catherine also worked for the family-owned hardware store, Bernhardt Seagle, where she discovered a talent for tracking billing and invoices greatly appreciated by her son George. A private graveside service was held December 10, 2011, at Bellevue Cemetery. The Celebration of Life service will be held Friday, December the 30th, 2011, at 11 a.m. at the First Presbyterian Church, conducted by the Reverend Edith Pruitt. The family will receive friends in the chapel following the service. Memorial contributions may be made to Caldwell Hospice and Palliative Care, 902 Kirkwood Street, Lenoir, North Carolina, 28645. Thanks to our very talented Gregory Knight, a local musician from Lenoir, North Carolina. Thank you, Greg, for the use of your music in this video. Please support our local museum, our Caldwell Heritage Museum, 112 Vaden Street, Lenoir, North Carolina, 28645. And please support our Caldwell Historical Society, 112 Vaden Street, Lenoir, North Carolina. Thank you.